The bruise on Eleanor's cheek had faded to a sickly yellow, but the memory remained fresh as an open wound. She stood in the cramped Philadelphia boarding house, clutching a newspaper advertisement that promised a new life out west. Her hands trembled as she read the words again. Wanted, respectable woman for marriage. Must be of good character and willing to travel to Dakota Territory. The paper felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. Behind the thin walls, she could hear Mrs. Halloway arguing with her husband. The sharp crack of a hand meeting flesh made Eleanor flinch. She knew that sound too well. Her own marriage had taught her its language. For 3 years, she had endured Richard's rage, his fists, his cruel words that cut deeper than any blade. She had believed his promises to change, believed his tears and apologies, until the night he nearly killed her. The doctor who treated her broken ribs had spoken in hushed tones, thinking she couldn't hear. Another week and it would have been too late, he had told the nurse. Eleanor had lain in that hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, and made a decision. She would rather die trying to escape than die in that house of horrors. Richard's family had money and influence. They had threatened her when she tried to leave, warned her that a woman alone had no future, no prospects. They were probably right, but Eleanor had discovered she would rather face an uncertain future than a certain death. She had taken what little money she had hidden away, left in the night while Richard was drunk and unconscious, and never looked back. Now, 3 weeks later, she sat in this boarding house with her meager belongings and the last of her courage. The advertisement seemed almost too good to be true. A man seeking a wife, offering travel expenses and a fresh start. She had written to the address given, carefully crafting a letter that mentioned nothing of her past. She spoke of her skills in cooking and sewing, her education, her desire for a simpler life away from the city. The response had come faster than she expected. The letter was brief, written in a clear, strong hand. It spoke of a ranch in the Black Hills, of open spaces and hard but honest work. The man's name was William Crow, and he promised fair treatment and respect. He had sent money for the train west and asked only that she come prepared for a life very different from what she knew. Eleanor had heard stories about the Dakota Territory. Some called it savage country, dangerous and lawless. Others spoke of breathtaking beauty and freedom unknown in the crowded eastern cities. She didn't care about the stories. All she cared about was distance. Distance from Richard, from his family, from the woman she had been when she believed love meant enduring pain. She packed her trunk with practiced efficiency. 2 dresses, one for travel and one for her wedding day. Her mother's locket, the only thing of value she owned. A Bible that had belonged to her grandmother. A few books, because she couldn't imagine a life without stories to escape into. Everything she owned fit into one small trunk, and somehow that felt liberating rather than sad. The train would leave in the morning. Eleanor spent her last night in Philadelphia writing letters she would never send. She wrote to her sister, explaining why she had to disappear. She wrote to the version of herself that had walked down the aisle to marry Richard, full of hope and foolish dreams. She wrote to the future, making promises she intended to keep. She would never let a man raise his hand to her again. She would never mistake fear for love or cruelty for passion. As dawn broke over the city, Eleanor stood at the train station with her trunk at her feet and a ticket clutched in her hand. She wore her best dress and a hat that covered most of her face. Her heart pounded with terror and anticipation in equal measure. Behind her lay everything familiar, including the nightmare she was fleeing. Ahead lay the unknown, and for the first time in years, Eleanor felt something she had almost forgotten. She felt hope. The train whistle blew, steam hissed from the engine, and Eleanor Hayes stepped aboard, leaving her old life behind with each mile of track that passed beneath the wheels. The journey west took 5 days, and with each passing mile, Eleanor felt the weight of her past lifting slightly. She watched the landscape transform outside her window. The crowded cities gave way to farmland, then to endless prairies that stretched to the horizon like a golden ocean. She had never seen so much open space, so much sky. It was terrifying and magnificent all at once. Other passengers came and went at various stops. Eleanor kept to herself, speaking only when necessary. She had learned in her marriage that drawing attention meant inviting danger. A woman traveling alone was already unusual enough. She wore her wedding ring, the one piece of her old life she kept purely for protection. People asked fewer questions of a widow than of a woman who had fled her husband. The train pulled into Deadwood on a dusty afternoon. The town was rough and wild, nothing like the orderly streets of Philadelphia. Wooden buildings lined muddy roads, and the air smelled of horses, smoke, and something Eleanor couldn't quite identify. Men with guns on their hips walked past women in bright dresses who called out from doorways. This was frontier country, and it wore its lawlessness proudly. Eleanor stood on the platform, searching the crowd for William Crow. He had written that he would meet her here, that she would recognize him by his height and his gray horse. She scanned the faces of waiting men, her stomach tight with nerves. What if he didn't come? What if this was all some cruel trick? What if she had traveled all this way only to find herself stranded and alone in this strange place? Then she saw him. A man stood apart from the others, tall and striking in a way that made her breath catch. But something was wrong. He wasn't what she expected at all. His skin was bronze, his long black hair hung in 2 braids over his shoulders, and he wore a mixture of native clothing and Western garments. His face was strong and angular, his eyes dark and watchful. This couldn't be William Crow. This had to be some mistake. The man walked toward her with calm confidence. When he stopped in front of her, he spoke in perfect English, his voice deep and steady. "Eleanor Hayes." She nodded, unable to find words. He gestured to her trunk. "I am William Crow. Welcome to Dakota Territory." The blood drained from Eleanor's face. She had been deceived. The letters had never mentioned this crucial detail. William Crow wasn't just a rancher in the West. He was Lakota. A native man. An Indian, as people back east would say with fear and contempt in their voices. The newspapers were full of stories about Indian attacks, about savage warriors and bloodthirsty tribes. Eleanor had traveled across the country to marry a man whose very existence contradicted everything she thought she knew. Her first instinct was panic. She wanted to run, to get back on the train, to escape this new trap she had walked into. But where would she go? She had no money left, no home to return to, and Richard would be looking for her by now. She was trapped again, just in a different way. William seemed to read her thoughts. His expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Disappointment, perhaps, or resignation. "I understand if you wish to leave," he said quietly. "I will not force you to stay. But I should explain something first. My father was Lakota. My mother was a white woman from Boston. She came west as a missionary and fell in love with a chief. I was raised in both worlds. The letters were truthful. I own land, I raise horses, and I need a wife. I simply did not mention my heritage because I knew most women would refuse before giving me a chance." Eleanor stared at him, her mind racing. She thought of Richard's sophistication, his fine clothes and proper manners, the way he had charmed everyone while hiding the monster beneath. She thought of how appearance and breeding meant nothing when measured against character. William Crow had deceived her about his race, yes, but he had been honest about everything else. He stood before her now, offering her a choice, not forcing her hand. "What kind of life would I have?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your people and mine, they're enemies. How would that work?" William's jaw tightened. "My people have been driven from their lands, killed, starved, and betrayed by the government. Yes, there is war. Yes, there is hatred. But I live between both worlds. My ranch is neutral ground. I have friends among the Lakota and among the white settlers who respect me. It is not an easy life, but it is an honest one. I promise you this, Eleanor Hayes. I will never raise my hand to you in anger. I will treat you with respect. You will have a home, safety, and freedom to be yourself." The promise hung in the air between them. Eleanor searched his face for signs of deception and found none. She thought of her options. She could refuse, try to find work in Deadwood, probably end up in one of those bright doorways calling to passing men. She could attempt to return east, risk running into Richard, spend her life looking over her shoulder. Or she could take a chance on this strange man who promised exactly what she needed most. Safety. Respect. Freedom. "I need time to think," she said finally. William nodded and picked up her trunk as if it weighed nothing. "I have a room reserved for you at the hotel. Take tonight. Tomorrow morning, I will return. Whatever you decide, I will help you get wherever you need to go." Eleanor barely slept that night. The hotel room was simple but clean, a luxury after days on the train. She sat by the window, watching the rough streets of Deadwood and wrestling with her decision. Every instinct screamed that she should be afraid of William Crow. Society had taught her to fear men who looked like him. But her instincts about Richard had been completely wrong, and those instincts had nearly killed her. She thought about the way William had looked at her. Not with the possessive hunger she had seen in Richard's eyes, but with something quieter. Caution, perhaps. Hope, carefully guarded. He had given her a choice, offered her escape even after she had come all this way. What kind of man did that? Certainly not the kind she had known. By morning, Eleanor had made her decision. When William arrived at the hotel, She was waiting in the lobby with her trunk. "I'll marry you," she said simply. "But I need you to understand something. I'm not running toward you. I'm running from my past. I can't promise to be a good wife right away. I don't know if I can trust again. But I'm willing to try." William studied her face for a long moment. Then he nodded. "That's more honesty than most marriages start with. Come. We'll be married today, then travel to the ranch. It's a half-day's ride into the hills." The wedding was brief and businesslike. A circuit judge performed the ceremony in his office with 2 witnesses pulled from the street. Eleanor spoke her vows in a steady voice, determined not to show fear. When William slipped a simple silver band on her finger, she noticed his hands were calloused from work but gentle in their touch. They signed the papers, and just like that, Eleanor Hayes became Eleanor Crow. They left Deadwood within the hour. William had brought a wagon for Eleanor in her trunk, and he rode his gray horse alongside. As they traveled into the Black Hills, Eleanor found herself mesmerized by the landscape. Towering pine trees rose on either side of the narrow trail. Granite cliffs jutted toward the sky. The air smelled clean and fresh, nothing like the smoky streets of Philadelphia or the dusty plains they had crossed. William spoke little, but when he did, his words were measured and thoughtful. He pointed out landmarks, told her about the animals they might see, explained the layout of his ranch. Eleanor listened, filing away information while studying her new husband from the corner of her eye. He sat his horse with natural ease, moving with the animal rather than against it. There was a quiet strength about him that was completely different from Richard's loud, aggressive dominance. They had been riding for several hours when William suddenly raised his hand, signaling them to stop. Eleanor felt her heart jump. 3 riders emerged from the trees ahead, blocking the trail. They were Lakota warriors, their faces painted, weapons clearly visible. Eleanor's blood turned to ice. This was it. This was the massacre the newspapers had warned about. William dismounted slowly and walked forward, speaking in a language Eleanor didn't understand. The warriors responded, their voices sharp and questioning. One of them gestured at Eleanor with his rifle. She gripped the wagon seat, forcing herself to breathe. William's voice remained calm, but she could see tension in his shoulders. The conversation seemed to go on forever. Finally, one of the warriors, older than the others, rode closer to Eleanor. He stared at her with eyes that held no warmth, only judgment. He spoke to William again, his tone harsh. William replied firmly, and something in his words made the older warrior pause. He looked at Eleanor once more, then back at William. He said something short and decisive, then he and the other warriors rode away, disappearing into the trees as suddenly as they had appeared. William returned to his horse, his face unreadable. They continued down the trail in silence for several minutes before Eleanor found her voice. "What did they want? What did you tell them?" William didn't look at her. "They're angry. The government has broken another treaty. Food that was promised hasn't arrived. Their people are hungry. They wanted to know why I was bringing a white woman to the hills. They said it was a betrayal of my father's people." "What did you say?" Eleanor's voice trembled despite her effort to control it. "I told them you were my wife, that you would be treated as family, and that any man who touched you would answer to me." William's jaw was tight. The older warrior is Red Cloud, a respected leader. He granted us safe passage, but he warned me. The anger against whites is growing. War is coming, Eleanor. My ranch may not stay neutral ground much longer. You need to know what you've walked into. Eleanor felt the weight of those words settle over her. She had fled one danger only to find herself in the middle of another. But something strange happened as she sat in that wagon, watching William ride ahead of her through the wilderness. She realized she wasn't afraid of him. The warriors had frightened her, yes, but William himself had not. He had stood between her and danger. He had claimed her as his wife, his family, with a conviction that demanded respect. "I'm not going back," she said firmly. William turned to look at her, surprise flickering across his features. "I've survived worse than warnings and angry men. If war is coming, then we'll face it. But I won't run anymore. I'm tired of running." For the first time since she had met him, William Crow smiled. It transformed his face, softening the hard lines and making him look younger. "Then welcome home, Eleanor Crow. Welcome home." The ranch was more substantial than Eleanor had imagined. A sturdy log house sat in a clearing, smoke rising from its chimney. A barn and several smaller outbuildings dotted the property. Horses grazed in a large corral, their coats gleaming in the afternoon sun. Mountains rose in the distance, purple and mysterious against the sky. It was beautiful and isolated, miles from any neighbor. William helped Eleanor down from the wagon. An older woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. She was Lakota, her face weathered and wise, her hair streaked with gray. "This is Morning Star," William said. "She was my mother's friend. She's helped me keep this place running since my parents died." Morning Star looked Eleanor up and down with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She saw the fading bruises Eleanor thought she had hidden, saw the way Eleanor held herself carefully, as if expecting a blow. Morning Star's expression softened slightly. She spoke to William in Lakota, and he responded. Then she turned to Eleanor and spoke in halting English. "You are welcome. Come. I show you your home." The house was simple but comfortable. One main room served as kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace that provided heat. Two smaller rooms branched off, one for sleeping and one for storage. The furniture was handmade but sturdy. Furs covered the floor, and dried herbs hung from the rafters. It smelled of wood smoke and sage, unfamiliar but not unpleasant. Morning Star showed Eleanor where things were kept, speaking in her broken English mixed with gestures. Eleanor tried to absorb it all, feeling overwhelmed. This was her home now. This strange place so far from everything she had known. William brought in her trunk, placing it carefully in the bedroom. "I'll sleep in the barn tonight," he said quietly. "Until you're comfortable." "I meant what I said. I won't force anything." Eleanor nodded, grateful beyond words. That night, she lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to sounds she didn't recognize. Animal calls in the darkness. Wind through the pines. The crackling of the fire in the other room. She was more alone than she had ever been, yet somehow she felt safer than she had in years. The days fell into a rhythm. Morning Star taught Eleanor about life on the ranch. How to preserve meat, how to identify useful plants, how to manage the household. Eleanor taught Morning Star more English, and slowly learned some Lakota words in return. The two women communicated as much through gestures and shared looks as through language, and slowly, something like friendship began to form. William was gone most days, working with the horses. He bred and trained them, selling to both white settlers and Lakota tribes. Eleanor watched him work from a distance, impressed by his patience and skill. He never shouted at the animals, never used force when gentleness would serve. She began to understand that this was who he was. A man who valued partnership over dominance, cooperation over control. Evenings were when they talked. William would return dusty and tired, and Eleanor would have dinner ready. At first, their conversations were stilted and formal. But gradually, they began to share stories. William told her about his parents, about his mother's courage in loving a man her own people despised, about his father's wisdom and strength. He spoke of growing up caught between two worlds, never quite belonging to either. Eleanor found herself opening up in ways she never expected. She told him about her childhood, about her love of books and learning. She spoke carefully about her marriage to Richard, not revealing the worst of it, but giving William enough to understand why she had fled. He listened without judgment, his dark eyes serious and attentive. One evening, about 2 weeks after her arrival, William was showing Eleanor how to properly bridle a horse. His hands covered hers, guiding her movements. Eleanor tensed instinctively, her body remembering Richard's touch, which always led to pain. William felt her reaction and immediately stepped back, giving her space. "I'm sorry," Eleanor whispered, ashamed of her fear. "I know you're not him. I know you won't hurt me. But my body doesn't know it yet." William was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice gentle. "My father once told me that a wild horse remembers every time it was mistreated. You can't reason with that memory. You can only prove, day after day, that things are different now. Eventually, the horse learns to trust again. But it takes time." He looked at Eleanor directly. "I have time. Take all you need." Something shifted in Eleanor's chest. This man, this stranger she had married out of desperation, was showing her a kindness she hadn't known existed. He asked nothing of her, demanded nothing, simply gave her space to heal. She realized that somewhere in the past 2 weeks, her feelings had begun to change. She was no longer just running from her past. She was starting to build something new. "Thank you," she said softly. "For understanding. For being patient." She hesitated, then added, "For being nothing like I expected." William smiled, that rare expression that transformed his face. "You're nothing like I expected either. I thought I was getting a wife who would keep house and nothing more. Instead, I got a woman with courage I can't begin to understand. You crossed a continent to escape your demons, Eleanor. That takes strength most people never find." That night, Eleanor lay in bed thinking about his words. She had never thought of herself as courageous. She had always felt weak, broken, damaged by what Richard had done. But maybe William was right. Maybe survival was its own form of strength. Maybe she was stronger than she had ever given herself credit for. In the barn, William lay in his bedroll, staring at the darkness. He had not expected to care for Eleanor beyond basic human decency. But he found himself drawn to her quiet resilience, her determination to keep going despite everything. She was healing, slowly, and he discovered that he wanted to be part of that healing. Not as her savior, but as her partner. As her equal. The realization both thrilled and terrified him. Spring turned to summer, and Eleanor began to feel something she had never experienced in her adult life. She felt at peace. The ranch had become home. Morning Star had become a friend. And William had become something she was afraid to name, afraid that naming it would somehow break the spell. They had moved beyond formal politeness into genuine companionship. William taught her to ride, spending patient hours helping her overcome her fear of the powerful animals. Eleanor helped him with the ranch accounts, her education proving useful in ways that surprised them both. They worked side by side, talked late into the evenings, and slowly, carefully, built a foundation of trust. One night in July, as they sat outside watching stars fill the sky, Eleanor reached for William's hand. It was the first time she had initiated physical contact. His fingers curled around hers, warm and strong, and neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The gesture said everything. But their fragile peace was about to be shattered. Tensions between the Lakota and the government had reached a breaking point. Promised food never arrived. Treaties were broken as quickly as they were made. Warriors were growing desperate as their people starved. The neutral ground William had maintained was becoming impossible to hold. The attack came at dawn. Eleanor woke to the sound of gunfire and shouting. William burst into the bedroom, his face grim. "Stay inside. Don't come out no matter what you hear." He grabbed his rifle and was gone before she could respond. Eleanor crouched by the window, her heart hammering. Through the glass, she could see mounted soldiers surrounding the ranch. They were shooting at the barn, at the corral. Horses screamed and scattered. Morning Star ran from her small cabin toward the main house, but a bullet caught her before she reached the door. She fell, clutching her shoulder. Something inside Eleanor broke. Not with fear, but with rage. She had run from violence once. She had spent years cowering, hiding, letting fear control her. Not anymore. She grabbed the rifle William kept by the door, checked that it was loaded the way he had taught her, and ran outside. Morning Star. She reached the older woman, helping her to her feet. Blood soaked through Morning Star's dress, but she was alive. Eleanor half carried, half dragged her toward the house as bullets kicked up dirt around them. They made it through the door and Eleanor barred it behind them. Outside, William stood in the yard, his rifle raised but not firing. He was shouting at the soldiers in English. "This is neutral ground. I have friends on both sides. You have no authority here." A soldier on horseback, clearly the officer in charge, spurred his mount forward. "We have reports of hostile Indians on your property. We're here to clear them out. Stand aside or be considered an enemy combatant. The only Indians here are my wife's companion and she's elderly and unarmed. You're shooting at civilians on private land." William's voice was steel. The officer sneered. "Your wife? You mean that white woman you tricked into marrying you? We know all about you, half-breed. Playing both sides, helping savages escape justice. Your protection ends today." Eleanor heard those words through the window and something inside her ignited. She flung open the door and stepped onto the porch, William's rifle in her hands. "My husband is right. You're trespassing. Leave our land now." The officer laughed. You don't understand what you've gotten mixed up in. This man is part of the problem. He supplies horses to hostile tribes. He gives them shelter. He's a traitor to his white blood." His white blood. Eleanor's voice rang out clear and strong. His mother was a Boston woman who chose love over prejudice. His father was a chief who treated her with more respect than any white man ever showed me. William Crow is twice the man any of you will ever be, and this is our land. Get off it. The standoff held for a long moment. Then more riders appeared from the trees. Lakota warriors, 24 at least, surrounding the soldiers. Red Cloud was among them, his face painted for war. He spoke, and one of the younger warriors translated. "William Crow is protected. His wife is protected. You are the invaders here. Go now or face consequences." The soldier officer looked around, calculating odds he didn't like. His men were outnumbered and surrounded. He holstered his weapon with visible reluctance. This isn't over, half-breed. War is coming, and you'll have to choose a side. I chose my side when I married Eleanor, William said quietly. I chose humanity over hatred. If that makes me your enemy, so be it. The soldiers retreated, but everyone knew they would return. Red Cloud approached William, speaking in Lakota. William responded, then turned to Eleanor. He says you have a warrior's heart. He says any woman who stands between guns and her family has earned respect. He's offering us protection, a place with his people if we need it. Eleanor looked at the Lakota leader, at the faces of warriors who had every reason to hate her kind. She thought of Morning Star bleeding in the house, of William standing alone against armed soldiers, of the courage it took to choose love in a world that demanded division. Tell him thank you, she said. Tell him we stand together or not at all. Inside the house, Eleanor tended to Morning Star's wound while William spoke with Red Cloud and the warriors. The bullet had gone through cleanly, and Morning Star was tougher than she looked. She gripped Eleanor's hand and spoke in broken English. You are daughter now. You are family. You stay, you fight, you belong. When the warriors had gone and William came inside, Eleanor was waiting. She moved to him without hesitation, and for the first time since that night in Philadelphia, she let someone hold her. William's arms came around her carefully, giving her room to pull away if she needed to. But Eleanor didn't pull away. She leaned into his strength, let herself be supported, let herself feel safe. I was wrong, she whispered against his chest. I told you I was running from my past, not running toward you. But that's not true anymore. I don't know when it changed, but it did. I'm not here because I have nowhere else to go. I'm here because this is where I choose to be. With you. With Morning Star. In this place we've built together. William pulled back enough to look at her face. Are you sure? Because things are going to get harder. The soldiers will come back. The war everyone's been afraid of is here. If you stay, you'll be caught in the middle of it. Eleanor met his eyes steadily. I've been caught in the middle of things my whole life. The difference now is that I'm not alone. I have you. I have people worth fighting for. That changes everything. She paused, then added, I love you, William Crow. It took nearly dying today to realize it, but it's true. You gave me back my life. You gave me back myself. William's expression softened in a way she had never seen. I loved you from the moment you got off that train, terrified but too stubborn to show it. I've been waiting for you to heal enough to feel something besides fear. I would have waited forever if that's what you needed. They kissed then, gentle and tentative at first, then with growing certainty. It was nothing like the rough, painful kisses Eleanor remembered. This was mutual, equal, a conversation without words. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. The road ahead would not be easy. The conflict between white settlers and Lakota nations would rage for years. William and Eleanor's ranch would face more attacks, more threats, more demands to choose sides. But they would face it together, building bridges in a world determined to burn them. Morning Star would recover and become the grandmother Eleanor never had. Other outcasts would find their way to the neutral ground William maintained, creating a small community of people who refused to let hatred win. Years later, when their children asked how they met, Eleanor would tell them the truth. She had come west broken and afraid, running from one kind of violence into the uncertainty of another. But she had found something she never expected. She had found belonging. Not because she was rescued or saved, but because she chose courage over fear, chose to trust again, chose to build rather than hide. She had found a man who valued her strength, a family that accepted her completely, and a home worth fighting for. From abuse, she had found belonging. From desperation, she had found love. And that, she would tell her children, was the greatest journey of all. The end.